Welcome, everyone, and good morning. I hope that you have had a wonderful and rich morning. My name is Colleen Hanich, and I am very pleased to be here as a moderator of this second plenary session. I am the president of Xavier University, have been for 214 days, who's counting. I hope that you have really benefited from some provocative presentations, some questions, some answers, what I like to think of as Catholic higher ed brain candy, when we all come together and see one another and have new ways of looking and listening and thinking. But that said, I recognize that my wonderful speaker here on my right and myself are what stand between you and lunch. So we are going to be very attentive to the time. Many of you are already well aware of the work of our speaker, Dr. Eboo Patel. Dr. Patel is the founder and president of Interfaith Youth Corps, an organization that is committed to the idea that religion should be a bridge of cooperation rather than a barrier of division. He holds a doctorate from Oxford University in the sociology of religion, which he earned while a Rhodes Scholar. Dr. Patel has worked over 15 years with governments, social organizations, and colleges to make interfaith cooperation a social norm. He served on President Obama's inaugural Faith Council and is published in the areas of religious diversity and interfaith leadership. Across the country, we have all experienced a growing intensity around having appropriate leadership and programming in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I recently heard that in higher education, the role of Chief Diversity Officer is the fastest growing senior role across the country, as many presidents have added this strength to their executive teams for the first time in long and storied institutional histories. This phenomenon is even more dramatic on the campuses of our Catholic colleges and universities, as we have grappled with the growing call for racial justice in this country, especially as it intersects with our explicit mission as Catholic communities of learning and belonging. Today, we are so pleased to welcome you, Eboo, to help us as presidents and colleagues as we continue to unpack that complex intersection of faith and diversity and inclusion. We've asked Dr. Patel to speak for 35 minutes or so, and then we'll move to some open question and answer sessions. So please begin thinking about a question that you would like to ask when we're finished. And so now, without further ado, over to you, Dr. Patel.
Thank you so much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much. So, hi folks, how y'all doing? Great, it's great to be here. It actually feels very familiar to me. I grew up in a lot of Catholic settings. I'll talk about that a lot more over the course of my talk. But let me first locate this talk and myself a little bit. So, as higher ed does its work and fulfills its aspiration in positively and proactively leaning into diversity issues, one of the things I'd like to submit to you is that there is a Catholic experience, theology, and tradition of this that I think is a major asset for your universities. I really hope that what I say to you this morning is unbelievably boring, because that means you'll know it already, right? Because I'm not an expert, I'm not a theologian. Nothing I'm going to say to you is like deep in the footnotes of John Courtney Murray or Father Gutierrez or anything like that. I am an American Muslim of the Ismaili Tariqa of Islam who has been a beneficiary of Catholic institutions my entire life. My family has been a beneficiary of Catholic institutions across 4 continents, and I come here as an admirer. And perhaps as somebody to maybe remind you of some strengths that maybe you're not reminded about so often, right? I'm going to tell an unabashedly positive story. If I was speaking to the South African Congress of Muslims, I would tell an unabashedly positive story. If I was speaking to a group of European rabbis, I would tell an unabashedly positive story. I'm a positive person. There are less than positive stories to be told. Those are important. I'm not going to tell you one of those, right? I'm going to tell you a story of your strengths from the perspective of a beneficiary and an admirer. There might be some provocations along the way. Perhaps the most important is, how much do you already know of what I'm saying? And how much do your people know? And how much should they know? Right? So let's begin. So this is hallowed ground in my family, and I would imagine for many of you as well. So this is why I'm in this country, and my family's in this country, because a university founded by French Catholic priests and brothers, so somebody reminded me yesterday, admitted a somewhat wayward Ismaili Muslim immigrant from India into their business school in the mid-1970s. That man was my father. Develops a ferocious devotion to fighting Irish football, and begins the development really of kind of an American Muslim civic identity at what I like to call the American Vatican, which is Notre Dame. I mean that as a compliment, by the way, just to let you know. I mean that as a compliment. So when I was an undergrad in the early 1990s at the University of Illinois, I spent a lot of time reading critical theory. It was a moment of identity consciousness that actually in some ways feels like our moment now. I imbibed Cornel West and Bell Hooks and Gloria Anzaldúa and Audre Lorde, super important theorists, and the importance of kind of raising my voice on identity issues became more and more salient to me. And typically I would raise my voice to tell other people what they were doing wrong. I got very good at that. Perhaps you know some 19-year-olds like this. And I would, as is not foreign to anybody, I would do it principally directed at the institution that gave me the tools, which was the University of Illinois. So I would sit in the classes at the University of Illinois, and then I would go to the protests about everything that the University of Illinois was doing wrong. And when I came home, I was actually quite surprised that my parents were not that mad when I would gratuitously criticize the university to which their tuition dollars were going. And so, being 19, I pushed the envelope, and I started to criticize the university that my dad went to, Notre Dame, and he was not having it. And he said something to me, I would say things like, did they have, halal food? Did they have places for immigrant students? As if my dad kept halal, right? Like it was kind of ridiculous, right? But basically, did Notre Dame in the mid to late 1970s accommodate your identity as a person of color and a religious minority the way that they should have, right? And I wasn't polite about this, let's just say that. And my dad said something to me which shocked a new way of thinking. He said, Notre Dame was founded by a group of Catholic leaders in 1842 at a time of heightened, ugly anti-Catholic bigotry, at a time when Catholics were not allowed into other institutions of higher ed. It was founded principally for the uplift and formation of Catholic boys, poor Midwestern Catholic boys. They didn't have to let me in. Here's why I want to do a pause on this, right? Most religious institutions, through most of human history, in most societies, have been formed to benefit who? Your own religious community. That just makes all the sense in the world. So, why wouldn't I begin from the place, is it not stunningly remarkable that a religious institution founded at a time of exclusion of its own community and founded for the formation of that community would wide open welcome people from other communities? Why would I start from the position of critiquing from the view of what is perfect, rather than a position of appreciating from the moment of founding? They didn't have to let me in. Part of what I want to submit right from the jump is that Catholic institutions in America have helped to shape American pluralism. You are a particular church who builds institutions that virtually across the board let everybody in. Anybody name a Catholic hospital that doesn't admit people who are not Catholic? How many Catholic universities say only for Catholics? Fewer than 5? 6,200 Catholic grade schools and high schools? How many of them say only for Catholics? A huge number of those were formed at a time of Catholic exclusion. All of them have some mission of formation, and my Muslim kids go to your preschools. Why wouldn't you consider that just a massive gift to American society? When the Chicago Public School System sits down and does its, here's the number of students we expect for next year, they subtract the students that the Catholic schools educate. And if those 80,000 kids in the Archdiocesan school in Chicago came to Chicago Public Schools, the school system will be totally overwhelmed. You have built a public good. We rely on it. Why shouldn't you take credit for that? And I don't mean in some showers of gold way. I just mean we Catholics, out of the theology, experience, resources, and assets of our tradition, have built a set of institutions which serve everybody. And by the way, it's not about tuition dollars, it's about theology. And that's where we get into the heart of my talk, right? In this work, there is a theology of pluralism. In this work, you are implicitly saying a huge part of what the Catholic tradition is about is building institutions that serve everybody. How explicit is that theology of pluralism at your universities? If you were to ask people on, your cabinet, your faculty to say, what's the Catholic theology of pluralism? Why is it that we have Jews and Muslims here? Why is it that we cover the cross when it's time for Muslim prayers? Why is it that we make sure there's kosher food? We're a Catholic institution. What's our theology of pluralism? How many members of your cabinet would know? Feels to me that's important, right? Feels to me that's important. Important enough that I went to find out. I wanted to know why Notre Dame, in its founding, right, with its mission and charter, decided it was part of its ethos to admit my dad. Right? Why is the grotto on here? Because my dad, who is like the least ritualistic Muslim you will ever meet, right? Still connected to the faith, but not ritualistic, right? Still connected to the faith, but not ritualistic. He will say Arabic prayers when he goes to the grotto. He will not say Arabic prayers when my mom calls him to prayer. Amicably divorced now, perhaps that's a reason. But when he goes to the grotto, he will say Arabic prayers. So in a moment of, too big for my britches when I was a teenager, and I wanted to get to the stadium earlier, I pointed out that there's this statue of Mary on the grotto. And with my little Islamic knowledge, we Muslims don't do idols or icons. It could be considered shirk, assigning compeers to God, the only unforgivable sin in Islam. And my dad, I said, we can't be stopping here. It's a violation of my religion. We got to go straight to the stadium and get popcorn. Sit down. I thought it was going to work, right? My dad points out there's a chapter in the Quran named after Mary. And then he points to the candles in the cove and he says, in the Quran, God is described as light upon light. And he waves his finger and says, light upon light. Go say the Fatiha. There's something about this space that reminds my dad of his faith. Right? There's something powerful in that, right? There's something about the way you do your arrangements, there's something about the way in which you are Catholic that reminded my dad of being more Muslim. I don't think that's an accident. And I don't think that most of you think that's a bad thing. That's really beautiful, right? That's really beautiful that your theology of interfaith cooperation is instantiated in concrete ways on your campuses. The question of my talk is, how explicit is it on your campus? How well known is it? Can you cite chapter and verse of a Catholic theology of pluralism in the way that you might be able to cite chapter and verse of other approaches to diversity? So one of the ways that I want to get started is to just take a moment and say, as I would do with any community or any individual, what are your strengths, right? What are your strengths? So what are the explicit strengths of Catholic universities when it comes to diversity issues? There are not so nice stories to tell. Those are important stories. I'm not going to tell you that story. I'm going to say, let's begin with your strengths, right? So here's one really interesting strength. Muslims want to come to Catholic schools. That's not a small thing. There's 1.6 billion of us in the world, okay? And we prefer Catholic universities. This is front page New York Times 10 years ago. Front page New York Times. Even the New York Times recognized this. In the Middle East, in South Asia, outside of Cleveland, outside of Philly, in the western suburbs of Chicago where I grew up, Muslim families would prefer to send their kids to Catholic schools. All kinds of reasons for this, but I'll give you just the most honest, basic one. You respect our faith. That's a diversity strength. That's a diversity strength. You should be really proud of that. That you have built a space out of a particular religious tradition where a significant part of the world, like 20% by and large, thinks, I feel safe there. I feel welcome there. I feel like I can express myself there. This has not always been the case between Muslims and Catholics in human history, as you well know. It is the case now in American Catholic higher ed. You should be really proud of that. How did you get to this? How do we get from the conflict of 1,500 years ago to Muslims saying, I want to send my son or daughter to Benedictine University, to Dominican University, to DePaul, to Georgetown, to Cabrini. I want to send my son or daughter there because they respect my identity. Powerful strength. There's a second strength. When Hispanics, Latinos, Latinas, the Latinx community, when they move here, when they settle here, they trust the church. That's a strength. I'm not saying you're doing everything right, but that should be noted, right? That's a long time. 1960 to now, that's 60 years. 70% of the growth of Catholic institutions over the course of the past 60 years has come from that community. That's a strength. What are you doing right? Can it be applied elsewhere? So, another strength. This is a little bit of a counterintuitive one. So, as you can tell, I'm a big admirer of the church, right? I'm a big admirer of Catholicism. My not favorite part of Catholicism is the all-male priesthood. And I'm always interested in how universal values are particularized in different communities. So if there's a universal value of women's empowerment, and there are some barriers to it within the church, as there are in any cultures or traditions, including my own of Islam, asking the question, okay, so how does that express itself? It doesn't express itself here. It expresses itself elsewhere. You saw last night, right, who was honored, including my friend and mentor, Donna Carroll, the Hesburgh Award. You saw the leadership in the church of women. So it turns out that it's pretty prevalent in higher ed. So 230 Catholic colleges and universities, I think 180 who are part of the ACCU, 150 of them founded by women. It's an expression of leadership that at the very least should be noted. At the very least, it should be noted, right? I have a chance to have spoken at a number of your colleges, and every time I go speak at a college, whether it's Dominican or Cabrini, I'm always doing research on the mission of the particular college, the history of it. I get to come to Cabrini and see my friend, President Don Taylor. I get to do a talk on Mother Cabrini and immigrants and how that vision leads to the founding of Cabrini College. Right? And I feel like I'm getting a crash course in these remarkable Catholic women leaders. This is a strength. It's not about being perfect. It's a strength that you can build from. Should be noted. So, one of the ways we think about diversity now is as a story of exclusion. That is really powerful, right? I'll say later, I'll say now and later, that I think diversity work is really about two things, and it's threading the needle between two things. It's about polarization and marginalization. It's about being able to engage the facts of marginalization in a way that doesn't exacerbate polarization. And it's about engaging the challenge of polarization without papering over marginalization. In the telling of the story of marginalization, Catholics are almost always left out, which is actually quite striking given the history of Catholics. So, John Winthrop, right? He of the Arabella, he of the City on the Hill, he of the Puritans, right? He was a dyed-in-the-wool, hateful anti-Catholic. Nobody teaches you that in kindergarten or 5th grade or 8th grade or 12th grade or college or grad school. But what were the Puritans purifying? Catholic influence. What did Mr. Winthrop say as he was giving his great City on a Hill speech, quoted by Reagan, Kennedy, Obama, on and on? I'm building a bulwark against the papacy. We are escaping the designs of Jesuits, and lots of other things that I don't want to repeat in polite company. So I just want to say it bluntly. America launches as a racist project. It launches as a racist project. It also launches as an anti-Catholic project. And it's not just John Winthrop, right? I mean, Arthur Schlesinger says the deepest bias in the American people is against Catholics. Okay, I don't think it's the deepest bias, but top 5 is still pretty deep, right? Top 5 is still pretty deep. So this is kind of remarkable. It's kind of remarkable to think that your history is a history of exclusion. So why did the Philadelphia riots happen in 1844? Because there's a law passed a few years earlier which makes it mandatory to teach the Protestant, read King James Bible in public schools, which is intended specifically to make Catholics uncomfortable. Catholics, unsurprisingly, raise qualms and concerns about this. There's a whole set of conflict which bursts into deadly riots a few years earlier. And this is at least part of the beginnings of the parochial school system in the Philadelphia area. My wild guess is if you look at the history of your college or university or the Catholic schools in your area, there is some similar story. Some story of the exclusion of Catholics from local higher education, from local schools, from local health care, from local social services, and then a decision by Catholic leaders and lay people. Let me rephrase that. Catholic clergy and lay people, they're all leaders. Okay, Catholic clergy and lay people, we need to build our own system. And then what do? You turn around and give it as a gift to everybody so that my kids go to your schools. My mom graduates with a master's degree from DePaul. She's now a professor. My dad goes to Notre Dame. You build a set of institutions for yourselves because of exclusion and for the purposes of formation, and then you offer it as a gift to other people. I'm going to keep saying it. There is a theology there. You do this for a reason, right? You do this because of your interpretation of what it means to be Catholic. We'll get into that a little bit later, but it seems to me that this history is really important. And I want to show you this picture. Can I tell you how unlikely that picture is? Okay, so that is a black president with his black wife, with the Pope, who is from South America, at the White House. And nobody is freaking out. Okay? I mean, can we count the people? I'm on the south lawn of the White House, and I swear, I see the ghost of Lyman Beecher walking by and like having a conniption. And I thought I saw the ghost of Norman Vincent Peale walking by and having a, and instead it was Newt Gingrich 15 feet away and I waved. Right, he had just converted to Catholicism a few years earlier. That is the most stunningly unlikely picture that you could ever imagine. And I don't know what is more unlikely, the Latino Pope on the porch or the black president, right? In the mid-19th century, there's a whole movement called the Know Nothing movement, of which the great Catholic scholar Mark Massa says not only do most Americans know nothing about the Know Nothings, but most Catholics know nothing about the Know Nothings. Okay. So they elect 75 people to Congress in the 1850s. The entire Massachusetts state legislature is filled with know-nothings as write-in candidates. What's the single plank in the platform of the know-nothings? We are an anti-Catholic party that is for white Protestant domination. It repeats itself in the 1920s. The KKK, anti-black, anti-Jewish, anti-Catholic. There is a version of it that repeats itself pre-1960 into the run-up of the Kennedy election, the Norman Vincent Peale conference. Virtually every prominent white Protestant male minister is in DC for the Peale conference, which basically says if Kennedy is elected, he's going to send a one-word telegram to the Pope, unpack. Anybody hear a peep outside of Catholic circles that was concerned about the Catholicism of Joe Biden? It's basically gone from American public life. Anti-Catholicism is basically gone from American public life. How do you know that? Well, at this time in history, that's not just a Latino pope on the balcony. There were, 5 sitting Catholic Supreme Court justices? The entire presidential line of succession, Kerry, Biden, either Pelosi or Boehner, were Catholic. Flags of the Vatican flying on the South Lawn. Nobody's freaking out. This would have been the biggest freak out moment in history. It would have been all of the nightmares of the anti-Catholics come to life. So you have a history of exclusion. Out of that history, you build a set of institutions. In part because you're not let into others, in part for the purposes of formation. You then give those institutions to other people because of your theology of pluralism. Over the course of time, because of a variety of things, race certainly has something to do with it, right? Italian and Irish in the early 20th century are not white, they are white now. That certainly has something to do with it, right? But somehow America metabolizes its anti-Catholicism for the most part. What a wonderful experience that we can learn from and maybe apply to other dimensions where exclusion is still highly salient. Race, gender, sexuality. It is a great gift of the Catholic experience that America has metabolized one of its deepest biases. Can we spread that good? Can we tell that story? So, you know all this, but really, go through the history of your particular institution or the Catholic schools your kids go to or the Catholic hospital nearby and ask, what's the history of how this came about and what role did Catholic exclusion play in that? So how's the Newman Club formed at the University Conversation at the University of Wisconsin, where some Catholic students were meeting with a group of prominent, having dinner at the home of a prominent Catholic family, and we're talking about just how excluded they felt in class, how professors were virulently, publicly anti-Catholic in class. This is in the early part of the 20th century. That's the formation of the Newman Club. My guess is the vast majority of Catholic institutions have some semblance of that story, right? These people hate us. We need to form our own. You build it, and then you let other people come. So that's a bit of the Catholic experience of exclusion. And I think the remarkable journey of it, the remarkable achievement of it, the way that it might be offered as hopeful, somewhat instructive to other experiences of exclusion, right? I want to just do a quick review of what's inspired me about Catholic theologies of pluralism, right? So when you admit Jewish and Muslim and atheist and Jain and Sikh students to a Boston college, to a Santa Clara, to a Gonzaga, to a Seattle University, to a Loyola, why do you do it? Here's some of why I think that is. So my dad, when he was, when he would say that when he was at Notre Dame, he shook the hand of two great men, Joe Montana, Father Hesburgh, right? And he looks at his right. I know he's washed his right hand since 1978, but he would look at it as if like it's right. The glow is still right there, right? So I had a chance to meet. I actually told a story about my dad at Notre Dame 10 or 12 years ago at Boston College's Sesquicentennial, and the president of Notre Dame happened to the audience and said, "Why don't you come down to South Bend and meet Father Hesburgh?" And so I did, and I asked him. Why at the American Vatican would you proactively welcome students who are not Catholic? And he said, because there are two meanings of the word Catholic. Large C Catholic means allegiance to a particular church, to a particular path to God. Right? We are strong in that. We are strong. We're always learning about it, but we're strong in that conviction. Small C Catholic from the Greek means universal. And our wonderful opportunity at Notre Dame is the intersection of those things. It's the intersection of our allegiance to a particular understanding of God, our fidelity to a particular ecclesiology, to our church, and how that allegiance can help lead to human flourishing. And how can we be for human flourishing if we are not welcoming people into our universities and helping them flourish? We need to model what we want in the world. Right? So that, in a way, is kind of like one double click into the famous phrase, crossroads and lighthouse. Right? You all have heard that, right? We're a crossroads and a lighthouse. That's like a little bit of the theology of that, the two meanings of the word Catholic and the intersection between those things. So a second kind of pillar of my understanding of a Catholic theology of pluralism, I saw Father Heft in here earlier. I want to thank him for introducing me to the work of John Courtney Murray about a decade ago. But everybody here knows, right, this great Jesuit philosopher and theologian, early middle part of the 20th century, 1930s, he writes a groundbreaking book called We Hold These Truths, which is effectively both a love letter to America and the church, right? Two parts. One, to the church, we need to learn, I'm using his language here, to be a conspiracy amongst other conspiracies. We need to learn how to be a tradition amongst other traditions in positive dialogue. And to America, you need to understand us Catholics as an equal tradition at the table. This is at a time when the word Judeo-Christian hadn't really been invented yet. When, that great liberal lion, Franklin Roosevelt, he says, and I quote, "America is a Protestant nation. The Jews and Catholics are here under sufferance." So Courtney Murray is writing at this time, and he's developing what I think is just a really sophisticated theology of pluralism. And amongst, I think, the most important parts of this is he says the definition of civilization is people living together and talking together. That's the definition of a civilization. The barbarian is the person who destroys the conversation. The place where civilization thrives in its quintessence is at a university. This is where we live and talk together. And this was the line that Father Heft told me that got me thinking I had to go read this book. A university is a place where creeds can be at war intelligibly. I love that, right? Because it doesn't assume we're going to agree on important things. It says we have different creeds and we're going to be in conflict. We should do it intelligibly, and a university is the place where that happens. And anybody who seeks to destroy that conversation, that's the definition of barbarian. So I just want to pause and, from the perspective of kind of a Jesuit priest in the 1930s, how remarkable is it to say a Catholic university isn't just a place where we inculcate Catholic formation. It's not just that. This goes back to my dad saying they didn't have to let me in. It would make perfect sense to say, we built this place, Fordham, Notre Dame, Georgetown, Seattle, whatever. We built this place for the same reason the Puritans built Harvard, so that we could inculcate our tradition in our people, so that we could have a next generation of leaders, and that we could have a next generation of righteous lay people. That's what we do. Did you expect us to do differently? And here comes John Courtney Murray saying, no, no, no. Let the Jews in, let the Muslims in, let them articulate their creeds, let this be at war intelligibly. And let us not seek to win or dominate. Let us seek to learn. There's a lot of Aquinas here, right? That's remarkable, I think. In my mind, Alistair MacIntyre, Scottish philosopher at Notre Dame, builds on this. The purpose of a university is to initiate students into conflict. The purpose of a university is a place to have constrained disagreement, right? Again, I think from the perspective of a Catholic, you have a truth. You have a truth. You have a right to that truth. You are saying, really, in amongst the jewel in the crown of your institutions, your higher ed institutions, the purpose of this institution is not just to inculcate our truth in our people. It is to welcome multiple forms of ideas of truth and to facilitate a positive conversation. I love that MacIntyre and John Courtney Murray use words like conflict and war, because it suggests something that I just think is true about diversity that I don't think people say enough. Diversity is not just the differences you like. That's one of my best lines, by the way. Diversity is not just the differences you like. Did you expect it to be? Did you? Right? Did you expect people to agree on everything that was important? Of course not. So I think to myself all the time, right? If there's a dozen people in a room and they represent a dozen ethnicities and a dozen races and a dozen et cetera, and they all agree on the 10 most important issues in American life, I don't really think that's a diverse room. That doesn't mean it's not wonderful in other ways. It's a community of sorts. I love it, but it's not really diversity in the way that John Courtney Murray and Alistair MacIntyre are talking about, right? It's not like multiple ideas in a constrained disagreement. It's not an initiation into conflict. It's an inculcation of a particular type of ideology. I'm not saying that that's not important for some things that happen at a university. But it's really interesting, I think, to note that people with a particular truth claim are saying our universities are places where there should be multiple views in constrained disagreement with certain parameters. Right? Like, I'm not buying a brownie from the KKK bake sale, but I'm talking to everybody else. And I've learned from lots of different people that I disagree with. That's part of what a university is. So I've had the chance to be like near the light of God a handful of times in my life, in rooms with the Dalai Lama, in rooms with Desmond Tutu, in rooms with my spiritual leader, the Aga Khan. I was in a room once, a big room, Rockefeller Chapel at University of Chicago, with Father Gutierrez, who Donna Carroll told me if I'm going to say that John Courtney Murray was a Jesuit, I need to say that Father Gutierrez was a Dominican. So, said. I mean, so much of how I think about Catholicism's gift to the world is through this man, right? And it's like the cross in life. It's this vertical connection to God, and it's this horizontal connection to other human beings. And I actually read I woke up early and I read a bunch of Gutierrez stuff this morning just to kind of get myself spiritually pumped for this. And it's just so beautiful. It's just so beautiful, right? His language of God loves us gratuitously. He loves us gratuitously. Can we not give a little bit of that love to others? And so most people know Father Gutierrez's work in the line of the poor, which is the dominant part of his work, right? The preferential option for the poor. Christ does not love poverty, he loves the poor, right? There's also kind of a similar ethos in his work about the neighbor, about the other of any sort, right? About the person who is not like you, who you are in a dialogue with, constrained disagreement, creeds at war intelligibly, because you come from love and you give it to others whether you agree with them or not. Whether you agree with them or not. Again, I would say within certain parameters. Within certain parameters. I like to say, by the way, wherever you go on earth to help people who are the most forgotten, the most marginalized, the most destitute, a Catholic priest has always gotten there first. Always. Paul Farmer in Haiti, right? Catholic priest got there first, right? My friend Bob Roberts in Vietnam, Catholic priest. This is just how you do. And you come from this. You come from this. So this is the reason that I'm doing my work today. I was converted by Dorothy Day. I was converted into thinking that religion was inspiring by Dorothy Day, right? So I spent a couple years as an angry activist, and at some point the acid just ate me up inside. Maybe some people can maintain that over a long period of time, but I just decided, like, I love people more than I hate the system, and I don't want to be the person that I'm being. Like, my roommate wouldn't come back to the room at night because I would just give him long, angry lectures about stuff, And so I have these two pictures up here very intentionally. So I was first attracted to Dorothy Day by the picture of her there sitting with the hat, by this like calm opposition to injustice. But my long love for Dorothy Day was not because of what she opposed, it's because of what she built. It's not because of who she sat or stood against, it's because of what she built up. Houses of hospitality, right? And I mean, people learn in every generation, you can protest bad things out of existence. You cannot protest good things into existence. You just have to build good things, and that's just a lot harder. It's just a lot harder. It's a different orientation, it's a different skill set, and it's a lot harder, right? And I spent a summer in Catholic worker houses after my sophomore year in college. I was so taken by the movement. You can imagine what that felt like, explaining to my Indian immigrant parents, aren't we doing a law school prep seminar this summer? No, I'm gonna go sleep on the floors of Mary House on the Lower East Side next to former Vietnam vets who are dealing with addiction issues because I think this is where God is calling me, right? So and then I lived at St. Francis House in Chicago for a few months after graduating, but this is what converts me into religion is inspiring, right? And so in some ways, because honestly I didn't pay that much attention to the religion before this, I don't know why more people don't just think religion is inspiring, because this is my foundational knowledge. Right? This is where I come from. It's not like I don't know other things. Of course I know other things, right? But this is my formation. Religion is inspiring. We should note injustice and be against it, but mostly we should build better things, because there's a kingdom, but it's not going to fall to earth unless you build it. So I think that you can juice this kind of Catholic theology of pluralism into three very simple things, right? So this isn't deep, this is bumper sticker stuff, but bumper stickers aren't bad, they can be helpful, they can be orienting. You respect, you relate, you cooperate. What do you do when you encounter diversity? You respect. Where do you come from? What's your identity? Who are you? You relate. How can we find a way to relate? You cooperate. What can we do together? Right? And I think that you all do this pretty well in action. My big question for you, and I don't know the answer to this, right? So I don't know if this is a challenge or a boring question. If you were to go around your cabinet and say, what's our theology of interfaith cooperation? And is it more Murray style or Gutierrez style? What would your cabinet say? Would they know? I promise you something, okay, this is a little bit of a gauntlet with so much love. If you went to Zaytuna College, the first Muslim college in America, located in Berkeley, and Sheikh Hamza called his cabinet together and said, what is our Muslim theology of interfaith cooperation? Every single person would be able to answer that question. Every single one, chapter and verse, into Quran and tafsir, and deep and deep and deep. They all know. They all know. So when I was running this presentation by Father Holschneider, and I was like, what's going to get me into trouble here? He's like, everything, but do it anyway. He's like, you got to talk about Jesus. I'm like, oh, yes. I love Jesus. I'm going to talk about Jesus a little bit. So your theology of interfaith cooperation comes from lots of places. Your remarkable theologians, a set of your remarkable popes, remarkable people who do it in action like Dorothy Day, etc. But really it starts from here, right? And these two images are intentional as well. So what's the story of Jesus and the woman at the well? Jesus encounters a Samaritan woman at the well, and he argues with her. He has a doctrinal dispute with her. He says, you pray to a God you do not know. You pray to a temple that's the wrong temple. He's telling her she's wrong, right? He's the leader of an emerging religious group, and he's not surprisingly telling somebody who is from a different religious group, which is how the Samaritans were principally marked in difference, that she's wrong. And that, next to the story of the Good Samaritan, I just think is unbelievably remarkable. Because what's the story of the Good Samaritan? Everybody knows this, right? This is like Sunday school, 3rd grade. Right? The priest and the Levite leave the traveler by the side of the road. By the side of the road. They are following the law. They are leaders of the community. They don't want to get unclean. Who stops? The Samaritan. What does he do? Bathes the wounds with oil and wine, puts the traveler on his donkey, brings the traveler to an inn, stays with him through the night, accompaniment, proximity. Leaves the innkeeper a couple of days' wages so that the traveler can convalesce fully back to health. And the story ends with the line, go and do likewise. How does the story begin? No. No. This is really important. How does the story begin? No. I'm going to say it again. I'm like being very professorial here. How does the story begin? How do I attain eternal life? Can I ask you something? What is more important in your religion than how do you attain eternal life? I'm totally serious. What is more important in a religion than how do you attain eternal life? Any Jummah you go to in Islam, you will hear the Imam talking about Jannah, heaven. God, give us Jannah. Give us heaven. What is more? So the setup of the story is it doesn't get more important than this. It doesn't get more important than how you attain eternal life. And what's the lesson of the story? Don't follow the people who are doctrinally correct when they are ethically wrong. But by the way, this isn't like, in my view, this isn't deep in the footnotes, right? This isn't deep in the footnotes. This is like overt, on the cover. The Samaritan is from a different religion. You know that from the story of the woman at the well. Jesus is not afraid to argue with people from different religions and say you're doing it wrong. In the story of the Good Samaritan, he is saying the people who are doctrinally correct when they are ethically wrong, we're going to point it out. And I'm going to tell you that the way you attain eternal life is by following the positive ethics of the person with whom you doctrinally disagree. This is the archetypal interfaith story. This is the archetypal, this is the fountainhead of a theology of interfaith cooperation. Right? we will admire, be in relationship with, respect, cooperate, even follow people who we doctrinally disagree with, who have superior ethics in a particular moment. I just think that's so beautiful. That's your religion, right? I'm just the Muslim guy who sends my kids to your preschool, right? I'm just the guy whose parents are educated in your institutions, but you built these things. I think you should talk about them more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibu, for the reminder of our shared founding story as Catholic institutions and for the ongoing gift and invitation that we offer to the world. And I share a brief story. Prior to my time at Xavier, I served as president at LaSalle University in Philadelphia for a number of years. And in that summer of the great unpacking, and all of you have lived through that when you move to a new institution, I received a beautiful letter from one of our alums who had graduated in the 70s and who shared with, he was a rabbi, he is a rabbi, shared with me the remarks of a recent presentation he had given in his congregation, and it was called How LaSalle University Made Me a Better Jew. And this whole notion that we're hearing, this invitation to draw out of yourself the best possible tenets of your faith through welcome. So thank you for that clear reminder of the invitation that our institutions grant, of our obligation to continue to welcome and to invite, and as, frankly, our role as revolutionaries. Together, we now have a few minutes left, colleagues, before we will break. So I'm going to invite a question, anyone who would like to ask a question, make a comment here to the mic. The instructions are a little different. You don't have to face the back of the room this time. You can face the front of the room, but please come forward.
Not a question. Margaret Carney, President Emeritus at St. Bonaventure University. Ibu, I think we'd all be nervous about asking a cabinet or board group, are you following Courtney Murray or Gutierrez? What I would propose is we have a new text, and it is Fratelli Tutti by Pope Francis, which begins with the Good Samaritan story and ends with a clarion call that all of our future work must be interfaith and interreligious. I think it may be the strongest statement of the interreligious imperative by a pope since the Second Vatican Council. So I think that might be an accessible text for us to work through to reach that consciousness.
Great, thank you for adding to my reading list.
Hello. Thank you for your remarks. I love the image of you not purchasing a brownie from the KKK bake sale. Your last slide implies that we need to love the ethics of those that we disagree. So explain how I can still buy a brownie and appreciate the ethics of someone that is so vile as the KKK.
Yeah. So I admire people who will go into the lion's den. I'm just not one of them. I think there's different work for different people. So I'll talk to lots and lots of people I disagree with, right? I have a line and I would say it's the KKK bake sale, but I would say 99% of America's on the other side of that line, including people who voted dramatically different than me in the last 20 years, right? So I think that like my understanding of like civic discourse is pretty wide. It has a dotted line there, but I super admire these stories of like that Stephen Carter, the great law professor at Yale, tells of Thurgood Marshall meeting with these vile racists in the back of these dark restaurants, so to get to know them better. I admire that. I'm just not that person, and so part of this is just what person are you? What kind of person are you? Look, they made a movie about this, Dead Man Walking, about somebody of your world, right, a Catholic sister who does do that work. There's a reason that was such a profound movie. It's because that kind of work is really profound and moving. It's for some people and not everyone.
Ibu, thanks so much. Chris Domes, president at Newman University outside of Philadelphia, colleague of Colleen's. And what would you say to the 19-year-old today, as you talked about your experience, as we interact with our students on our campus? What have you learned? What would be the experiences? And what would you say to yourself as you talked about yourself as this sort of radical 19-year-old that was challenging so many things? What would you say to him today if given the chance?
Yeah. I just wrote a book about that, actually. And it's my last slide. I'm going to put it up because my publisher's like, you got to show the slide, which I failed to do until you asked the question. So we could put I'll just put it up so you guys can see the cover. But I tell the kind of, and I forgot really the most important slide. Donna Carroll's about to scream, but the slide before this is if people are interested in this. So I'm going to get to your question in just a second. I failed on a couple of really important things here. Yes, thank you for that. So if people are interested in this, what is the Catholic theology of pluralism, particularly around really challenging issues like racism, right? We're IFYC, the organization I lead in partnership with Father Holschneider and Rebecca and the whole crew at ACCU, is going to be hosting a seminar for presidents in Chicago with some terrific speakers and seminar leaders that's going to be basically a fulsome presentation of Catholic theologies of pluralism with particular attention to racism and race that we hope can build on this asset base. So Father Holschneider will talk about this more at your meeting tomorrow, at the meeting of college presidents, but this is the basic information on it. It is late June in Chicago, typically a wonderful time to be in Chicago. IFYC is thrilled that Donna Carroll, who's on our board, has agreed to kind of anchor this work with us, and you'll see some of the folks, just terrific people. Mary Hinton, who's also on the IFYC board, Father Massengale, who will be a part of that. So thank you for reminding me of the several important things I forgot to tell. And now to your question, right? So I just wrote a book on this, and the kind of it's called We Need to Build. It'll be out in May, and the kind of turn line in the book is the goal is not a more ferocious revolution; it's a more beautiful social order. And the story that I tell in the book of like my personal turnaround this is, I literally spent years thinking that the most important use of my voice was telling other people what they were doing wrong. And as I got involved in interfaith work, I would go to conferences and I would stand up, and Jeff Carlson, is Jeff Carlson here? He would remember me doing this 20, 25 years ago. I would stand up and I would shake my fist, and I would at a nice polite conference like this, somebody like me on the stage, I'd be up in the middle and I'd be like, you people are boring. Where's the edginess? Where's the real religious diversity? Where's the social action, right? Like I was that guy. I was that 20-year-old, 21-year-old. So at one of these conferences, tell the story in the introduction of this book, this is the United Religions Initiative Conference, June 1998 at Stanford. I pull that, okay? There's titters all over the crowd, all through the crowd. I'm feeling really good about myself. I've stood up to the man, right? And this woman comes up to me afterwards. Her name is Yolande Trevino, and she says, that's a really interesting vision. This notion of like broader religious diversity than just Catholic and Jewish theologians on the dais, and more young people, and more social action, more edginess, something that feels more like Dorothy Day and Bayard Rustin, you should build that. And I was like, whoa, right? Because honestly, I was accustomed to getting lauded for my critique. And here was somebody being like, you have a vision. You should build that. 25 years later, I'm still here, right? And that's the beginning. I mean, encountering Dorothy Day was the beginning of something different for me, a beginning of a love-based approach, just being just hugely admiring about the building of Catholic worker houses, but that was the first time somebody had said to me, within your critique is a vision of the good. Who, you think it's going to fall from the sky, buddy? You should build that. And so part of what I try to do when I go to campuses these days is when I hear a critique is to say, is there a vision there? Can you build that? Right? And what would it, if you don't, who do you think it's going to? Right? And there, you know, the kind of theology of my book is you defeat the things you do not like by building the things you do. And I have to say, I think that it is not our highest purpose to send forth a generation whose best work is telling other people what they're doing wrong. That is not our highest potential. Thank you all.
Colleagues, so much for us to think about and carry on as this conference continues. We will now break for lunch, and at 1:45 you will move into the second set of breakout sessions. So you'll find those in your book, right here, complete with rooms and where to go for everything. Thank you so much again, Dr. Patel.